November 1942. The Pacific Ocean stretched black and endless beneath a moon smothered by clouds, the horizon erased into a single unbroken field of darkness. Cold salt wind whipped across steel hulls and radar antennas trembled in the night, dripping with heavy moisture drawn from depths where light never touched. The engines of American submarines throbbed deep inside their steel shells, quiet but persistent, vibrating through the bones of their crews. Men moved in shadows, careful with sound, boots whispering across grated floors. The air smelled of diesel, metal, sweat, and tension that trembled like a taut wire. Above them, the surface rolled slowly, water thick as oil, waves black as volcanic glass. Every sound felt amplified. Every second pulsed with the knowledge that something vast was hunting unseen beneath or beyond the horizon. In that immense, silent expanse, fear did not feel like emotion. It felt like atmosphere. To the men of the U.S. Navy's submarine force, it was a season of mystery and frustration. They were fighting a war that stretched across 1/3 of the planet, a war ruled not by trenches or tank divisions, but by shipping lanes, ocean currents, tide schedules, and the unseen geometry beneath the waves. Control of the Pacific was not measured in territory, but in tonnage. Fuel tankers, merchant convoys, ammunition ships, troop carriers, and supply transports threading through thousands of miles of blue emptiness. The side that controlled the sea would control the war. The United States believed it commanded the surface. Japan, quietly and with precision, intended to control the depths. The American fleet sailed confident in its superiority. American intelligence believed the Japanese submarine force was crude, slow, and poorly coordinated, a threat but not an existential one. Reports claimed that Japan possessed no sophisticated naval infrastructure beyond its major military harbors, all known and mapped, all visible to reconnaissance. Analysts argued that an island empire shattered by economic pressure could never construct hidden bases capable of supporting long-range submarine operations. They believed the Pacific was too vast, too exposed to conceal a naval fortress. The ocean leaves no secrets, they said. The seabed hides no armies. There is nowhere to hide a fleet. They were wrong. Beneath volcanic cliffs, under jagged ridgelines carved by ancient lava flows, inside mountain caverns shaped by centuries of geological pressure, the Imperial Japanese Navy engineered something the United States believed impossible. Underground submarine fortresses, invisible sanctuaries carved in stone, shielded beneath entire mountains, protected from bombs by hundreds of feet of rock and concrete. Their entrances lay beneath tidal surf, masked by camouflage breakwaters and false shorelines. From the sky, they appeared as nothing more than natural coves, reefs, and caves. Even low-altitude reconnaissance planes saw only jagged coastal rock. But beneath the surface, tunnels extended deep inland, branching through labyrinths large enough to house dozens of submarines simultaneously. Workshops, torpedo rooms, barracks, command stations, fuel stores, machine shops, ventilation chimneys disguised as shrines, hospitals carved into stone, all existed beneath islands that on American maps were labeled only as coral and jungle. For the Japanese fleet, these bases were a revelation. They meant stealth on a scale no navy had ever possessed. They meant submarines could vanish without returning to any known port, rearm unseen, repair unseen, and emerge into open water without detection. They turned the Pacific theater into a chessboard where Japan could move pieces invisibly. They turned the ocean into a fortress. For the Americans, disbelief became complacency. Complacency became blindness. And blindness became catastrophe. The first signs that something was wrong came with silence. Submarines that did not return, patrol routes where vessels vanished without a whisper, positions where contact ended mid-transmission. In early 1943, the USS Argonaut disappeared. No confirmed wreck. No distress signal. No survivors. Then the USS Perch. Then USS Grunion. Then USS Triton and USS Amberjack. Commanders chalked losses to depth charges, bad weather, bad luck, and the cruelty of submarine warfare. They assumed the usual explanations. They did not ask the right question. How could so many boats vanish without debris, radio contact, or sightings of wreckage? How could experienced commanders vanish along well-known routes? How could entire crews disappear without leaving a fragment of steel or oil slick? The answer remained hidden under stone and seawater. As American admirals debated causes inside war rooms lit by map lamps and cigarette smoke, Japanese officers stepped through echoing tunnels beneath fortress islands. Their boots struck polished concrete laid over volcanic rock. Their breath fogged in cool, subterranean air. Standing on underground catwalks, they watched mechanics rearm steel submarines with Type 95 torpedoes, inspected engines bathed in yellow lamplight, and listened to reports of American vessels destroyed without ever sighting the attacker. These bases were engineering miracles, dry dock chambers sealed by massive steel blast doors hidden underwater, elevator systems capable of lifting submarine bows to allow repairs that would have been impossible on open docks, miles of stone and concrete shielding the base from air or surface attack. American aircraft dropped explosives on nearby slopes, never knowing the heart of the base lay buried thousands of feet deeper. Inside U.S. submarine control rooms, sonar operators pressed headphones to sweating ears, listening to the cold mechanical heartbeat of the ocean. Propeller rhythm, cavitation trails, distant ships drumming through water. Hydrophones crackled and hummed with underwater noise, but the signatures they sought simply vanished. Radar screens glowed green and empty, sweeping through space like rotating searchlights over desert. Periscope lenses revealed nothing but fog and black water stretching as far as the eye could see. Commanders peered through prisms, expecting the silhouettes of ships, and found only blank horizon. Officers drew red grease pencil routes across navigation charts, calculating probabilities of interception, timing convoys down to the minute. And yet submarines disappeared as if the ocean swallowed them whole. American analysts refused to accept the possibility of something greater than error. They dismissed survivor rumors of subs emerging from caves. They ignored reconnaissance photographs showing unnatural wakes near volcanic cliffs. They rejected reports of seaplanes landing near uninhabited islands and disappearing beneath rocky archways. They wrote off radio intercepts indicating Japanese vessels were being serviced from unknown coordinates. It was inconceivable. It violated logic. It contradicted doctrine. And in war, doctrine can blind as effectively as darkness. Meanwhile, the Japanese High Command believed victory at sea was possible because they possessed something the United States did not: the ability to vanish. Disappear from the enemy's eyes, one admiral wrote, and the sea becomes your weapon. Their confidence grew with every submarine that slipped unseen through underwater gates, every torpedo strike that erupted without warning, every American vessel that failed to return. The Imperial Navy believed they had turned the ocean itself into a shield. And in those months, they had. In the Pacific, the weather carried sound like a living thing. Wind howled through rigging. Waves slapped steel hulls with the rhythm of drums. Storms cracked like artillery. But beneath the surface, the silence was total. American submariners learned to fear the stillness between sonar pulses more than any explosion. They stared into pale red lighting inside narrow steel corridors, listening for the faintest change in engine vibration, the slightest shift in hydraulic hum. Every man aboard felt the ocean pressing in from every side, tons of pressure, unseen but omnipresent, squeezing steel like hands closing around bone. They knew one sound could mean death. One mistake, one failed dive plane, one leak, and still, submarines vanished. As more and more disappeared without trace, whispers spread through submarine crews. Some believed the Japanese possessed a new weapon: magnetic anomaly detectors, underwater radar, guided torpedoes beyond known capability. Others believed Japanese destroyers had become impossibly efficient. But the truth was far more dangerous. The Japanese simply no longer needed to be found at sea. They were waiting underground, protected from pursuit. There were moments when American lookouts saw what they could not comprehend. A line of foam rising unnaturally along a cliffside, a submarine breaching at an angle impossible for normal launch, a ship emerging from under pounding surf with no fathomable source. Crews described it in debriefings. It came from the rock itself. The sea opened and released it. There was no horizon disturbance. It was just there. Reports were quietly buried. Intelligence officers called them exaggeration, stress hallucinations, tricks of weather and exhaustion. The first real wave of alarm struck Washington when high command analysts studied the pattern of disappearances. Losses clustered around regions where reconnaissance flights consistently reported unusual coastal geology. Rabaul, Truk Lagoon, Kure Naval Base, and several islands whose names would become synonymous with disaster. These are not random sinkings. They were strategic erasures. Weeks passed. Months. Ships vanished. Submarines vanished. Convoys vanished. And the American war effort for the first time since Pearl Harbor felt the cold edge of uncertainty. The Pacific, which had seemed manageable through numbers and industry, began to feel haunted, an expanse controlled not by ships or aircraft, but by silence. And then the moment came that changed everything. A long-range patrol aircraft sent out near the volcanic chains of the Caroline Islands reported tracking Japanese submarine movement that made no tactical sense. Submarines appeared on radar for seconds, vanished, and reappeared miles away without surfacing. Analysts argued equipment failure, but the crew insisted their instruments were functioning. They had witnessed something impossible, and their report ended with a sentence that echoed through naval intelligence offices with the weight of prophecy. If they have a hidden base down there, we will never control this ocean. The message was dismissed, and then 4 American submarines disappeared in 12 days. Without oil slicks, without wreckage, without bubbles, without sound. It was the beginning of a truth the United States refused to see until it was too late. When the first American submarines disappeared without a trace, the Pacific changed forever. The losses mounted like a tide, rising in complete silence, creeping inch by inch until suddenly everything below the surface had changed. In the headquarters of the United States Navy, frustration was turning into anxiety, anxiety into doubt, and doubt into something that military doctrine had never prepared them to face. The possibility that they were no longer the hunters in the Pacific, but the hunted. Traditional explanations collapsed under the weight of numbers. No statistical model could justify the disappearance of so many submarines so quickly, scattered across hundreds of miles, operating under different commanders and different mission profiles, in weather conditions ranging from calm tropic seas to violent monsoon storms. The Pacific was too large, too chaotic, too unpredictable for coincidence. And yet the command structure continued forcing the illusion of control, directing patrol routes, reassigning forces, and pressing submarine skippers to be more aggressive, unaware that aggression was now suicidal. The United States was fighting a war based on a map that no longer reflected reality. Their intelligence grid was blind, their radar net incomplete, and their assumptions poisoned by arrogance. The belief that an island nation under blockade could not possibly conceal something so elaborate as invisible submarine fortresses. But the ocean has always been a world where what is unseen matters more than what is seen, and the Japanese had understood that truth long before the Americans acknowledged its consequences. Inside the underground fortress at Rabaul, deep beneath layers of basalt and reinforced concrete, Japanese engineers monitored the arrival of another submarine slipping through the camouflage sea gate. The steel colossus slid beneath the rock wall as if entering the mouth of some prehistoric beast, the surface of the ocean parting only for seconds before sealing behind it, erasing the wake. Inside the cavern, massive hydraulic doors sealed shut, and the submarine settled into a cradle structure that locked its hull in place. Teams of mechanics moved like synchronized machinery, refueling, rearming, unloading wounded crew, replacing cracked turbine blades, swapping out torpedo tubes, and feeding intelligence reports into the command rooms carved into stone. The atmosphere smelled of salt, oil mist, hot steel, and the mineral dampness of subterranean caverns. It felt like a world separate from the war above, as if the ocean overhead was only illusion and the submarine fleet existed outside the reach of time. Officers walked along balconies overlooking dry dock stations where torpedoes gleamed under industrial lamps, their polished warheads reflecting the amber glow like predatory eyes waiting in the dark. On stone walls, painted banners declared messages of victory, discipline, and inevitability. Every submarine that entered these hidden bases emerged again with confidence sharpened like a blade. Meanwhile, on the surface warships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, conversations grew more muted. Submarine officers had once joked freely during meals, trading stories of narrow escapes and skill maneuvers. Now, they ate in silence, studying casualty reports that stretched longer with each passing week. Morale shifted from determination to suspicion. Commanders whispered about the possibility of traitors or compromise codes. Engineering failures were investigated with obsessive scrutiny, every gasket and weld examined under magnification. Communications officers poured through intercepted signals, searching for patterns in the static. Sonar operators trained themselves beyond exhaustion, listening through hours of monotony broken only by occasional false alarms that sent crews scrambling to battle stations. Even underwater, voices carried tension, tight breaths, strained whispers, and the sound of steel creaking under pressure like bones bending. One night, the submarine USS Scorpion tracked what it believed was a Japanese convoy, faint propeller signatures moving at irregular speed. The captain ordered silent pursuit, descending deeper, adjusting trim to maintain neutral buoyancy. Sonar traced movement as a series of intermittent pulses, like a heartbeat muffled by layers of water. But then something uncanny happened. The sound did not fade or shift as expected. It stopped instantly, replaced by suffocating silence. The crew listened, every muscle rigid. Seconds stretched into minutes. The ocean felt empty. Then the sonar board pulsed with an abrupt burst of noise. Not an engine, not a propeller, but a metallic resonance like the grinding of stone. It vibrated through the hull, rattling bolts and echoing through air ducts. Men clutched onto support rails. Hydraulics moaned. Lights flickered. No one had heard anything like it. Then it vanished. The captain ordered evasive maneuvers, but the ocean remained dead silent. Hours later, when the submarine surfaced for a brief radio burst, the message it sent was brief and confused, ending with a phrase that left analysts uneasy. Sound originated from below the seabed. It was dismissed as acoustic distortion, emotional exaggeration, or technical malfunction. 3 days later, the Scorpion vanished. No trace. Back in Pearl Harbor, maps stretched across the intelligence floor resembled a constellation of disasters. Red pins marked final known positions of lost submarines. Strings traced projected escape paths. The clusters grew tighter around volcanic archipelagos that somehow remained absent of visible Japanese infrastructure. The admirals could no longer ignore what pattern screamed. Something was happening in places the United States believed empty. A survey flight was ordered. High-altitude reconnaissance swept over suspected coordinates. Pilots reported nothing visible, only rocks, black beaches, jagged cliffs, and deep coves where waves churned violently. The photographs returned clean and empty. The analysis center declared the region irrelevant. The Admiralty moved resources elsewhere. And then more submarines vanished. The Japanese celebrated each disappearance not with triumphant declarations, but with quiet certainty. In their eyes, they had rewritten naval warfare. A new form of strategy was emerging. One in which dominance came not from fleets visible in formation, but from the ability to erase presence completely. Officers studying engagement logs understood that the Americans were struggling with an enemy they could not locate, could not engage, and could not predict. The Imperial Navy believed they had achieved mastery not through firepower, but through invisibility. Their doctrine shifted: eliminate logistics, cut communication arteries, drain the American war machine from beneath. Like rot inside a tree, invisible until collapse. Inside American submarines, men slept in thin bunks inches below torpedo racks, breathing recycled air heavy with carbon dioxide, dreaming of sunlight they had not seen in weeks. They woke to orders delivered in low tones, drank bitter coffee, scorched by diesel fumes, and endured heat that felt suffocating during long silent runs measured by hours instead of miles. They knew death lurked beyond the hull, but fear became something strange. Not the tension of combat, but the dread of the unknown. Fighting what you can see is war. Fighting what you cannot see is paralysis. The turning point came with a survivor. In late 1943, a battered Japanese destroyer attacked a U.S. submarine near New Britain. Depth charges thundered through the water, and the submarine barely escaped. The shock waves split bulkheads and crippled engine mounts. The submarine surfaced at night, limping, its hull bleeding oil across moonlit water. A Japanese patrol craft spotted the silhouette and opened fire. Machine gun bursts cut through the conning tower. A small group of sailors was swept overboard by blast concussion. Only one man survived long enough to be pulled aboard the Japanese vessel. He was taken prisoner to an underground facility whose location he could not identify. The man later escaped, rescued by Allied forces months later after wandering through jungle. During interrogation, he said he had been held inside a mountain, where submarines slept like animals inside caves. He described massive steel gates beneath ocean water, torpedoes stacked floor to ceiling, officers walking catwalks above cavern floors carved by drills the size of locomotives. He insisted he had seen over a dozen submarines inside, docked in rows, engines silent, like predators in a lair. He drew rough diagrams of tunnels and docks. Intelligence officers labeled him unstable, his story exaggerated by trauma. No one believed him. The Japanese continued operating from their invisible arsenals, slipping beneath the radar net, weaving between coral channels, emerging to strike supply lines, and withdrawing again without trace. Convoys sailing toward Australia were struck with expert precision, tankers erupting into pillars of fire that turned night into day. Ammunition ships detonated in explosions that sent shockwaves for miles. Rescue vessels arriving minutes later found only burning oil and silence. The ocean swallowed the rest. The Americans reacted with fury, launching massive anti-submarine campaigns, deploying sonar nets, minefields, and hunter-killer groups. Patrol aircraft combed the ocean with magnetic anomaly detection booms. Destroyer task forces tore through island chains, dropping patterns of depth charges that shook coral reefs. Yet the Japanese submarines disappeared beneath waves and reappeared somewhere entirely different, as if teleporting. American naval planners began facing the impossible truth. The war was no longer fought across the surface of the Pacific. It was fought beneath it, and the United States was losing. In Washington, a heated meeting shook the upper ranks of Naval Command. Charts and casualty lists covered an entire wall. Officers argued with raised voices. Numbers contradicted assumptions. Strategies collapsed under their own weight. And finally, a single sentence was spoken aloud, one that cut through the room like steel. If we do not find where they are hiding, we will lose the Pacific. The silence that followed was suffocating. The illusion of superiority shattered. The war had entered its most dangerous phase. The United States was finally ready to see what had always been hidden. But seeing would come too late. The ocean that Americans once believed they controlled now belonged to silence. And within silence existed an enemy they had never imagined. Everything was about to change. The search for answers began with a desperation that bordered on obsession, because by early 1944 the Pacific no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a trap. The United States Navy, accustomed to commanding oceans with steel and industry, found itself reduced to tracing ghosts across a map that no longer aligned with reality. Intelligence teams dug through mountains of reports, radar logs, sonar traces, intercepted messages, aerial reconnaissance photos, and survivor statements that analysts had once dismissed as hallucinations or exaggeration. The new directive was simple and terrifying: assume nothing. Everything the Navy previously believed about Japanese submarine capabilities was burned to the ground in a single night of strategic reckoning. The question was no longer whether the Japanese had hidden bases. The question was where they were, and how long they had been operating undetected. For the first time, the United States acknowledged that ignorance was more dangerous than defeat. The search began with geography. Cartographers and oceanographers were summoned into war rooms dominated by maps that now stretched across entire walls. Islands once ignored as insignificant suddenly became objects of scrutiny. Volcanic rock formations, reef chains, atolls with narrow tidal entrances, crescent cliffs that concealed deep underwater caverns. Naval engineers examined geological surveys taken before the war, searching for anomalies, lava tubes, sea caves, hollow basalt chambers formed by ancient eruptions. Marine biologists studied patterns of tidewater filtration and temperature variations that could indicate large underwater cavities. Coast Guard pilots reviewed decades-old lighthouse records describing unexplained tidal disturbances, unusual currents, and sounds heard through fog that resembled machinery rumbling below the seafloor. Suddenly, everything mattered. The Pacific, once an open battlefield, became a puzzle box. Yet even as analysts connected patterns, submarines continued to vanish. The USS Pickerel, the USS Tullabee, the USS Runner, the USS Dorado, the USS Escalar. The losses were no longer scattered but clustered in predictable arcs, curved lines surrounding regions where reconnaissance planes routinely reported distorted magnetic readings and dead radio zones. Destroyers assigned to hunt enemy submarines swept these regions repeatedly, dropping depth charges by the hundreds. Water erupted upward in massive plumes. Seabirds scattered. Coral shattered. Explosions thundered like volcanic eruptions. But when the water calmed, there was nothing. No debris. No oil. No bodies. No sound. The ocean closed itself like a wound. The Americans were fighting an enemy that left no footprints, while the United States struggled to find answers. Deep beneath fortified islands, the Japanese Navy studied, captured American equipment, and celebrated each loss with ceremonial discipline. Officers gathered in echoing stone chambers illuminated by lamps that flickered against rock walls carved with command insignia. They reviewed attack logs and plotted victory on maps where American control lines had begun to recede. They believed they were seeing the future, a future where land-based naval fortresses would reshape warfare, where submarines operating from invisible sanctuaries could strike without warning and retreat without trace. In their minds, the Pacific had already turned in Japan's favor. They saw the United States as a giant blinded by arrogance, staggering across an ocean it no longer understood, swinging blindly at shadows. The deepest secrecy of the submarine lairs was not their engineering or their location, or even their tactical value. It was their philosophy, the belief that visibility itself was death. Japanese naval doctrine, shaped by centuries of warfare fought from islands vulnerable to invasion, rested on an ancient principle. The unseen warrior defeats the seen one. Submarines were not weapons to be risked in open confrontation. They were silent knives. They were instruments of inevitability. They were not meant to fight battles. They were meant to erase fleets and erase hope. Inside the subterranean bases, banners displayed a phrase attributed to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a phrase spoken in private but never recorded officially. Victory belongs to the hand the enemy cannot see. And for a time, that belief seemed prophetic. The United States responded with technological fury. Factories roared day and night, pouring steel and copper into new sonar systems, underwater listening networks, magnetic anomaly detectors, and deep penetration radar. Engineers experimented with wave reflection mapping and underwater acoustic triangulation. The Navy began training specialists capable of reading subtle patterns in sonar echoes, faint resonances that revealed the shape of submerged chambers behind rock walls. Hydrographic survey ships sailed along volcanic island chains, dragging sensors that scanned the seabed like surgeons scanning bone. Aerial reconnaissance planes flew patterns tighter than ever, armed with cameras capable of resolving details down to inches. Yet the fortress entrances remained hidden behind waves and stone. If a base could be seen at all, it would appear only for a heartbeat as a shadow beneath surf, indistinguishable from natural caves sculpted by centuries of ocean violets. Inside submarines approaching suspected regions, fear became palpable. The ocean felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like a predator holding its breath. Sailors described sensations of being watched. Sonar operators heard faint metallic echoes that did not match ship signatures or geological formations. Men felt pressure waves ripple through the hull with no source. Depth gauges flickered without cause. Compass needles shivered erratically. Some crews reported hearing low mechanical vibrations, deep and rhythmic, like machines churning from miles away. They whispered that the ocean felt alive. Commanders dismissed such impressions publicly, but in private they recorded them meticulously. Even the skeptics felt dread. Then came the first real breakthrough. A long-range reconnaissance aircraft flying above a storm front captured a photograph that analysts initially viewed as meaningless. A wave pattern along a volcanic cliff that curved in a perfect semicircle, too symmetrical to be natural. Waves seemed to rebound outward from a point within the rock rather than against it. It took weeks of mathematical modeling before a young oceanographer proposed a theory. The wave interference pattern suggested a massive hollow cavity beneath the cliff, large enough to hold vessels the size of destroyers. The room fell silent. For the first time, science pointed directly toward the existence of underground naval fortresses. Admirals ordered immediate reconnaissance. Submarines were dispatched to investigate, cautiously, silently, with instructions to approach only at night, engines at minimum noise profile. The USS Swordfish arrived first. Its captain ordered the vessel to run at whisper speed along the suspected coastline, only periscope above water. The cliffs loomed black above churning waves. The smell of volcanic sulfur filled the air. Through the periscope, foaming surf slammed against jagged rock in relentless rhythm. The captain scanned the cliffs inch by inch, straining for any unnatural shape. Nothing. Then, as the submarine drifted closer, the sonar operator heard something. A faint hum beneath the roar of waves, like distant generators vibrating through stone. No one moved. The captain increased magnification. At first he saw only darkness. Then the swell shifted. A seam appeared, a vertical line where water surged inward rather than outward. A gate disguised as rock. Before he could react, the cliff erupted with movement. The wave line split open. Water surged outward in a blast as a massive submarine launched at full throttle. Bow rising sharply from beneath the cliff, foam exploding from its hull. The Japanese vessel cut across the Swordfish's bow like a blade, its propellers screaming, its crew invisible. The American captain ordered a crash dive, engines roaring to pull the submarine beneath the trajectory of what they expected to be torpedoes. But none came. The Japanese submarine vanished into the darkness before the Swordfish even stabilized. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. But it changed everything. When the Swordfish surfaced hours later and transmitted its report, the message hit naval headquarters like artillery. The enemy is using hidden sea gates. We witnessed a submarine launch from inside a mountain. The world shifted in a single sentence. Shock turned to fear. Fear turned to anger. The United States could no longer deny reality. They had been fighting the wrong war. And as intelligence reeled, Japan struck harder than ever before. Submarines operating from invisible bases orchestrated one of the most devastating coordinated attacks of the war, a synchronized assault on American supply lines stretching from Hawaii to Australia. In a matter of weeks, fuel convoys were shattered. Ammunition carriers disappeared. Troop transports erupted in fireballs that lit night skies for miles. Pacific airfields found themselves starved of aviation fuel. Ships carrying tank battalions destined for island assaults never arrived. The war machine groaned. For the first time since Midway, the United States faced the real possibility of strategic collapse. And the Japanese commanders watching from deep inside their underground control rooms believed victory had already begun. In Washington, panic radiated upward through command like current through live wire. Congressional pressure mounted. Newspapers printed headlines questioning why the Navy was losing control of the ocean. Families demanded answers for the lost crews. Officers faced interrogations demanding explanations they could not provide. The Navy entered its darkest hour. Yet in that darkness, something hardened, a resolve that would define the final turning point of the war. The United States would find the invisible bases. They would destroy them. They would drag the enemy out of hiding. And they would reclaim the Pacific or burn trying. All of history pivoted there, on a moment when victory depended not on guns, fleets, or soldiers, but on the ability to uncover a secret buried beneath stone and ocean. The war was no longer about who controlled the sea. It was about who controlled the unseen. The campaign to destroy Japan's invisible submarine fortresses became the most secret and desperate strategic operation of the Pacific War, a mission hidden even from many officers who fought beneath its shadow. It unfolded in silence, without headlines or parades, without the roaring heroism of carrier battles or beach landings broadcast through newsreels. The United States mobilized every fragment of intelligence gathered from sonar anomalies, aerial photographs, intercepted communications, wave pattern studies, and survivor testimonies, merging them into a single goal: identify the entrances. Naval engineers constructed scale models of volcanic island chains and used high-pressure water simulations to reconstruct how ocean swell interacted with hollow rock chambers. Mathematicians tested thousands of hypotheses on fluid dynamics, searching for tiny deviations in tide patterns that signaled concealed displacement tunnels. Radar technicians recalibrated equipment to detect faint electromagnetic interference produced by hidden generators whose vibration frequencies echoed through basalt like distant heartbeat. Every department contributed because time was running out and the Pacific was bleeding ships faster than American factories could replace them. At Pearl Harbor, a secret task force was assembled under a command so restricted that most personnel worked behind partition walls with no knowledge of the greater objective. The group was made of oceanographers, cryptographers, geologists, submarine commanders, hydrodynamic physicists, and intelligence officers who had previously studied volcanic island stability. They combined naval strategy with scientific theory and field reconnaissance. Their maps became dense with symbols and red-lace coordinates marking suspected underwater cavities. Every discovery led to another mystery. And the more the Americans learned, the more they understood how little they actually knew about the Pacific itself. A battlefield so vast that thousands of square miles had never been explored deeper than a diver's rope. Meanwhile, Japanese command within the hidden fortresses watched American movements with cold calculation. They monitored convoy routes, intercepted communications, mapped search patterns, and counted how many ships disappeared in the dark without leaving wreckage. They measured American desperation not in battles fought, but in the escalation of search efforts. Within the cavernous control rooms, officers stood before massive wall charts illuminated by lamp glow, tracing enemy trajectories with brushes dipped in black ink. They believed the tide had turned, that American strength was exposed as illusion, and that Japan's destiny was finally within its grasp. Beneath miles of stone, they watched the Pacific from behind masks of stoic discipline and whispered ancient warrior oaths beneath their breath. They believed they had built something eternal. But their eternal refuge contained a fatal flaw: arrogance. They assumed secrecy was invincible. They assumed the Americans would continue to search blindly, attacking open water rather than the stone walls that concealed their true enemy. They assumed endurance would outlast brute force. They assumed time belonged to them. History would prove them wrong. The breakthrough came not in a laboratory or a war room, but in a moment of brutal chance. A U.S. submarine hunting near a volcanic island chain detected an abrupt sonar echo unlike anything previously recorded. Not a ship's signature, not seafloor, not geological sediment. It was a hollow resonance, wide and deep, and pulsing rhythmically like breath. The captain ordered silence. Engines idled. Men held their breath. They launched a small, unmanned acoustic probe into the water, a crude experimental device designed to map underwater voids. It drifted slowly into darkness, emitting sonar bolts. The returns were faint but unmistakable. The cavity was massive, a chamber the size of a cathedral hidden beneath thousands of tons of rock. The probe never returned. Its signal vanished abruptly, either destroyed or absorbed. But its final echo changed the world. Within hours, emergency orders summoned destroyers, submarines, and reconnaissance aircraft to converge on the region. The sea boiled with movement. Specialized sonar equipment scanned depths with military precision. Planes traced hyper-accurate grid lines overhead, cameras firing continuously. Some images returned blank. Others returned hazy distortions. One frame returned a glimpse, a perfect right angle hidden within natural rock formation, too precise to be crafted by nature. The Americans had found one of the gates, and the mission changed from search to annihilation. The assault was planned without ceremony, without media, without historic flourish. It was a war fought beneath the surface, unseen by civilians, unknown even to many sailors who served within its blast radius. The Navy launched a coordinated bombardment designed not to breach the fortress directly, but to collapse the rock above it. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers anchored in triangulated range and unleashed shells designed to fracture volcanic basalt. The bombardment lasted for hours, each impact sending shockwaves through stone and ocean. Above the surface, the island cliffs shuddered violently. Below, inside the fortress, Japanese officers stared upward as dust cascaded like ash and rock crumbled from ceilings onto steel decks. The hidden docks trembled. Submarines strained against moorings. The mountain groaned like a dying animal. Panic, for the first time, cracked the silence. The cavern walls fractured like glass under artillery fire. Massive support columns split apart. The hydroelectric generators that powered dock gates and lighting systems shook loose from foundations and tilted, gears screeching. Water surged through the chamber floor as cracks opened below sea level. Officers shouted orders drowned by thunder, trying to launch every vessel before collapse sealed the exits permanently. Crews sprinted to submarines, hands trembling on metal rails slick with shattered stone. Engines roared to life. Dock cranes crashed into seawater and vanished. The sound of cracking basalt drowned everything. The first submarine launched successfully, forcing its bow through a narrowing gateway that collapsed behind it. The second attempted to follow but was crushed instantly as tons of rock collapsed directly onto its hull, splintering steel like bone. Water exploded upward in a geyser of shattered metal and oil. Men screamed and vanished beneath black waves. The fortress was dying, consuming its creators. As the bombardment intensified, the cavern ruptured completely. A massive collapse triggered an explosion of trapped air and seawater that erupted from the hidden sea gate like a volcanic detonation, sending a column of white spray hundreds of feet into the sky, visible to ships miles away. The mountain shuddered, split open, and sank inward as the sea rushed to fill the void. When the water calmed, nothing remained but floating debris, shattered wood, metal fragments, fuel slick, and a single lifeless torpedo tube rolling on the surface like wreckage from an ancient war. The Japanese commanders listening from distant bases received transmissions cut off mid-sentence, voices that dissolved into static and then silence. Their greatest fortress, their pride and shield, had been destroyed without a single enemy stepping inside. The myth of invincibility collapsed with the mountain. Confidence turned to dread. Dread turned to rage. Rage turned to despair. The last hidden submarine bases, once symbols of untouchable power, became tombs. The collapse marked the beginning of the end. American forces now understood the pattern, where the bases were likely located, how they were constructed, and what geological signatures revealed their presence. Within months, every suspected island chain trembled under coordinated bombardment. Hidden tunnels collapsed. Submarine pens flooded. Caverns imploded beneath millions of tons of pressure. The ocean swallowed fortresses that had taken years to carve. Japan's silent submarine fleet, once the unseen blade, became trapped in dead stone or forced into open water where American hunter-killer groups awaited with sonar-guided efficiency. The Japanese commanders watched their invisible empire dissolve beneath them, swallowed not by enemy soldiers, but by the science they underestimated. The psychological collapse was seismic. Officers who once believed they commanded a divine strategy faced the unbearable reality that their strongest weapon had become a mass grave. Samurai doctrine fractured. Pride evaporated. Men broke. Diaries recovered years later described feelings of betrayal by fate, of horror at the sound of rock grinding underwater like thunder, of watching comrades drown in darkness illuminated only by failing emergency lights. Some officers chose ritual suicide. Others stood silent for hours, unable to speak. The weapon meant to guarantee Japan's dominance became a monument to hubris. When Japan surrendered months later, the world never learned what had happened beneath the surface. Official reports buried the submarine fortresses under layers of classification. Maps were sealed. Witnesses sworn to silence. The war's most secret battle disappeared from history books. The collapsing mountain was recorded as geological failure. Submarine losses were attributed to conventional naval action. The Pacific returned to peace, but beneath its calm surface lay a graveyard stretching across thousands of miles of ocean floor. Metal coffins sealed inside drowned cathedrals of rock. For decades, Divers reported faint sonar echoes that seemed to come from nowhere, shadows shaped like tunnels hidden below basalt, temperature variations inconsistent with solid stone, metallic rings beneath depth charges, and strange magnetic interference near remote island cliffs. Fishermen spoke of nets snagging on objects they could not pull free. Sailors swore they heard low mechanical hums beneath waves at night, like engines running in the dark. Most were dismissed as superstition, but every myth comes from a fragment of truth. Today, the remains of the invisible submarine bases still exist somewhere beneath the Pacific, crushed beneath collapsed stone, sealed inside drowned labyrinths built with the belief that they would never be found. They lie silent, untouched, preserved by pressure and darkness, entombed with the crews who died believing victory was within reach. They are the last relics of an idea that changed warfare, an idea built on secrecy, precision, and a belief that the unseen would always triumph over the visible. But the ocean keeps its own memory. And sometimes, when storms churn deep water, sonar operators hear echoes that should not exist, reflections of something hollow, vast, waiting. History remembers battles fought in daylight. It remembers beaches and carriers and flag raisings and the roar of engines in open sky. But wars are not won by what the world sees. They are won by what the world never knows existed until it is already gone. The invisible submarine fortresses were never monuments to power. They were monuments to the danger of certainty. They proved that arrogance is more fatal than fire. They showed that technology without humility leads only to ruin. They demonstrated that the strongest weapon is not steel or gunpowder or industrial might. It is knowledge. The United States did not win the Pacific through size or courage or weaponry alone. They won because they refused to accept ignorance as truth. They won because they learned to see what was not meant to be seen. They won because they understood that the real battlefield is the space between certainty and doubt. And when the ocean finally calmed and the noise of war dissolved into silence, only echoes remained. Echoes bouncing through stone chambers where submarines once rested like predators waiting for nightfall. Echoes heard by no one except machines tracing patterns through darkness. Echoes that say, victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the unseen hand that learns to find the invisible. The Pacific does not remember flags or speeches or the names of admirals. It remembers the quiet. It remembers the darkness. It remembers the sound of mountains collapsing into water. It remembers the moment when the age of hidden war ended, not with celebration, but with the silence of a grave. And somewhere beneath miles of black waves, the corridor floors are still intact, sealed behind walls of stone, waiting untouched in eternal darkness. There are no footsteps. There are no voices. There is only the ghost of a war that nearly vanished without trace, and the reminder carved in steel and salt and bone. The unseen decides everything.